Please don't feel sorry for me that I'm going to have to work hard to get my voice out to you. I had surgery on my vocal cords and I have not regained all the ground I intended to regain. But in the next little while, we're going to cover a lot of ground. And I expect that I'm not the only one that's going to have to work hard. It's worth working hard because we actually face a significant crisis, a great challenge, and there's so much at stake. Consider the State of the Union. If somebody had told me 15 years ago, let me show you a reel of what the future of your country might be, and they included a reel of what we've actually been through in the last 15 years, I would not have believed it, not in my country. I would have said, oh, the probability of that must be less than 1%. Show me what really happened. And for me, it's been very painful to see all that we've lost, all the degradation of our democratic institutions, of our ability to talk with our fellow citizens across the different points of view, all that's happened to our capacity to deal with the challenges that we face. I have felt a lot of pain. I have grieved more deeply than even when my parents died. One when I was 21, one when I was in my 50s. I grieved, but not like this. It goes on. I feel pain, and I bet many of the people in this room feel similar pain. There's the question I raised in the opening words. So what do we do with our pain? Well, we can distract ourselves, turn away from the thing which is ugly and we don't like looking at. We can use that pain to just vent, just throw out our voices and just say how unhappy we are to see. We can lapse into despair. I have felt for 9 years, since I first saw clearly what I see, that we are called to do something else. We are called to treat our pain as part of the world's way of summoning from us the means to meet this challenge and to solve this problem. But we don't necessarily know what to do or what the problem is unless we have understood what it is that we see in the world around us. And I've dedicated myself to trying to create a picture which is true and meaningful about what's going on. Well, the political system is clearly the locus of the problem, so that's what we have to focus on. There has arisen on the political right a force which is unlike anything which has ever come to center stage of American politics, with the possible exception of the 1850s, and you know what that ended up doing to the country. This is a force which is more destructive and more persistently dishonest than anything that I would have imagined could emerge as this has. Now, some people might wonder at this point, oh no, is this guy another one of those people who demonizes the other side? I'm so tired of that. Well, let me assure you, that's not who I am. It is not what I'm doing. The first time I stood on this platform, I gave a talk called Beyond Dispute, saying that liberals and conservatives should stop polarizing around the issues and have a meaningful dialogue to arrive at a higher wisdom that integrates the truth of the two different sides. That's who I am. That's who I would like to be. But something's changed in the, I think, 17 years since that occasion. It's not me that's changed. It's something that's happened in our political arena. The battle that's being fought in our political arena is not fundamentally political. It is a moral and spiritual force that we are confronting. It is not about liberal versus conservative. It is more fundamentally about constructive versus destructive. It's about honest versus dishonest. It's about compassionate versus cruel. In that context, if anybody is wondering, is this an appropriate talk in the IRS equivalent of the church? I think about the anti-slavery forces that emerged out of a great awakening of evangelical Christianity in the early decades of the 19th century and expressed itself about an issue that was being fought in the political world, but which was fundamentally moral and spiritual. I think that to the extent to which I understand what Felix Adler was about, I think he would agree that this is not an inappropriate thing. So, having dealt with those, let me tell you what I see having happened on the right, though that is not the topic of this talk, it just sets the stage. If we take the many things, by now I've been doing this full-time for 9 years, thousands of pieces of news and developments, we can congregate them into patterns where we see what this force does. It's a force that makes a fight out of everything. They even fight about ideas that were theirs. They fight against them. War is the message. Content is irrelevant. It is a force which is insatiable in its quest for power and wealth. Even though we have the greatest inequality in living memory, they are continuing to fight for more for those who have the most at the expense of those who have less. Even though we have increasing division of power between the giants on our political, in our power system and the average citizen, they are laboring through the Supreme Court and otherwise to take still more power out of the democratic system into the plutocracy. It's a force that preys on the vulnerable. No additional taxes to people who have tripled their share of the national wealth, but let's cut the food stamps. It's a force that demonizes the other side. I live out there in Virginia, and I'll tell you, they don't have communists to kick around anymore, but liberals will do. It's a force that is consistently dishonest. These are some of the patterns you can draw out of, and I'm not going to document these things. If you want to go to my website, some of these things, there are dozens of, and some of these things this is documented in the hundreds. These patterns are themselves indicative of something more fundamental. We should be asking ourselves, what is it that would express itself in all these ways? It would express itself in imperialistic wars, in voter suppression, in denial of climate change, the whole list. That question, what is expressing itself through all these patterns, what's even more fundamental than these little groupings, is one that is not adequately asked in liberal America. And that is very telling, I think. I believe, and I have good reason to believe, that it's not asked because the answer doesn't fit on the worldview of many people in liberal America. I was here 7 years ago delivering a talk about the concept of evil. But let me back away from that fraught word and just say they all have in common that they are destructive. They're destructive of the structures and frameworks and bonds that enhance life, that create justice and beauty and love and all those things which are whole. That is what we are up against. But we don't talk about it that way. That leads to the real topic of my talk, which is that the other side of the coin between what has happened on the political right is what has happened on the political left. In the face of this crisis, liberal America, on the whole, and there are exceptions, has not responded with anything like the fervor of the attack being waged upon it. There is a significant mismatch between those who are willing to repeal a Republican idea 40 times and those who are under assault, whose values are under assault, who keep reaching out, who keep on talking about, they're good, we just have different, I'm so tired of it. There is a blindness to what it is and a weakness for the battle that must be fought. I don't like the idea of having to fight, but sometimes you don't have a choice. Whether you like it or not, you can't necessarily go on the way you were. You may have to choose between fighting a battle or becoming subject under the dominion of a destructive force. And that is the choice we face in America. There's a line in Yeats, which is in the title of my talk. I didn't notice whether it's in the program, but the title of this talk is, What to Do When the Best Lack All Conviction and the Worst Are Filled with a Passionate Intensity. That is the case, and it's really two sides of the same coin. One side is filled with a passionate intensity, and the other side responds on the whole, as if it does not have intense conviction for which there is something sacred that requires a full-bodied, full-hearted response. Now, why has there been this mismatch between the forces of destruction and the forces that should have as its number one priority, when so much is at stake for our children, our grandchildren, what kind of country and what kind of planet they're going to live in? Why this mismatch? Well, there are three reasons, and I'm going to dwell on the third. The first one is actually to the credit of liberal America and the humane people. There are some people who need war. They are not whole themselves, and so division and conflict in the world is the only world they feel comfortable in, or less uncomfortable in. People who have the capability to enjoy their gardens and to enjoy their friendships and enjoy a cup of coffee in the morning and enjoy the sunset, they'd rather do that than fight. Who wants to fight that's healthy? So that's to our credit. Another dimension of it is the wimpy dimension. I think that a good deal of if you look at the history of the last generation, there's a dynamic between the right and the left, which is essentially the dynamic between bullies and the bullied, intimidated. There's got one side that'll make a fight over anything, and another side that's really reluctant to fight about anything. But there's a third reason, and that's really where, well, how about that for an introduction? Now, like I said, we're going to cover a fair amount of ground. There's a third reason, is that liberal America has developed, and here I mean through the philosophy of people who have been rational and thinking, have over the course of a century, certain aspects of a worldview have crept in a way which means that the sources of passionate intensity have been attenuated. There's been a cutting off. Now, what are the sources of passionate intensity? I'd like to identify three. One is a deep moral passion, a passion for the idea that things should be as they should be. We should have justice and not injustice. We should have love and not hate, and all those things. A passion for it because our commitment to it, our devotion to it, our belief transcends our own self-interest. It is a labor of love to defend it. But the intellectual tradition that I was educated in contained a great force that says there are no real values. They are matters of opinion. You look out there, what's real is what's objective is what's out there. There are no values out there. It's just opinion. There is nothing sacred. We understand how the world came to be. We've got matter and energy obeying the laws of physics, and then chemistry, and then biology. Life emerges in a sort of mechanical fashion out of the primeval ooze and the selective process of mutation, and it creates life. Nothing can be sacred according to this way of looking at things. If we see the real truth, that it's not Genesis, it's this. And the third source, we get a sense of meaning when we see how things fit together. If we see things only as this, like countless individual facts, or a university which is organized about departments and fields and specialties and subspecialties. I read a book 40-some years ago called The Broken Image about the lack of coherence in how things are understood. I believe in the intellectual rules of rationality, of evidence processed by logic. But I don't think that those rules have to get us to those places. I think that has led us into false conclusions on values. Well, I say values are real, just like human anatomy is real. Values emerge out of the evolutionary process. The first step is, in evolution, there is a preference for what survives over what cannot survive. Life over death. That by itself doesn't create value, because value has to be, if something's going to matter, it has to matter to somebody. Somebody, it has to make a difference. That somebody feel, this is better than that. Well, evolution in its process has created creatures, of whom we are one, but one species, but not the only. It's been fashioned to have experience as a motivating factor to get the creature to do what serves the survival of its kind, and to avoid those things which are injurious to the survival of its kind. That's where value comes in, and it's not idiosyncratic. A kitten being petted and purring is definitely better than a kitten being tortured. That world in It's a Wonderful Life with Jimmy Stewart in it versus with Jimmy Stewart out of it, Bedford Falls with all this community and all these people whose lives are working and families that are functioning well, that world is better than Pottersville. How do you like my sophisticated references? It is better. It's not a matter of opinion. It is better because sentient creatures being fulfilled is better than sentient creatures in misery. As for the sacred, I'm going to skip over that because there's a lot of ground yet to cover. I'll just say that the sacred should be considered as values on steroids. And there is a sacredness in the world, and people experience it. To say there is no value, to say that nothing is sacred, is logically, I think, equivalent to say, well, there's no such thing as pain. I mean, where do you find pain? Out there? No. There is such a thing as pain. It's not out there, but it is in the order of things. And we are enmeshed in that order and are wired toward life because that's what evolution creates. And that's who we are. A third point. It is useful to think about things in terms of wholeness versus brokenness. Evolution of life creates a kind of wholeness. From the level of the wholeness, meaning things are ordered in a right and life-serving way, a way which serves the values that are real. From the level of the cell, which is, my friend over there with the camera could explain better than I, how intricately ordered it is, even from the atomic level all the way up to the biosphere. There is a wholeness. And in the past, when we've had brokenness disrupting the order of life. I'm not going to say nature isn't red in tooth and claw. I'm not going to say there's not parasitism and predation and disease and all those things, because evolution is not planned as far as we can tell. It's purely opportunistic, but all that is encompassed by something larger than just the predation. The predation actually is part of the order that keeps even the prey species healthy. The brokenness would come from outside the living system. Life has been creating wholeness, but it doesn't stop something from coming streaming out of space 65 million years ago and leading to a global wave of extinctions. It doesn't prevent North America and South America from floating into each other and leading to a mixing of marsupials and placentals and leading to another wave of extinctions. But now, something else has happened in the last 10,000 years. Out of the system of life itself. I meant to bring up a couple of my books. This book is called The Parable of the Tribes. You can't see it because it's the Emperor's New Book. Only people of great insight. This cover design. The Parable of the Tribes is a book about what happens to a species, any species, that steps out of the niche in which it evolved biologically and becomes free to invent its own way of life. But inadvertently, out of that, comes living entities that are not regulated by any order, a kind of brokenness. The wholeness has been, the biological process has been added to by another process where civilized societies are thrust into a struggle for power. Out of the struggle for power comes a selective process, and societies start growing in directions that have to do with the needs of society for power. That's where brokenness comes from. in the human system. And it reverberates. It has an impact on human beings. We are a damaged species. We are much better by nature than we ever think of, because we look at our history and imagine this is human nature writ large. It is not. We have been put into an impossible situation which we have not yet been able to master. We don't yet fully understand. We have been damaged by, first of all, because the struggle for power is unending and inevitable in this anarchic situation. People are traumatized by the world the Athenians described as the strong do what they can and the weak suffer what they must. It's not regular, it's not life-serving in order. There is no order yet that protects humanity from that dynamic. And it is also wounding to us, because we live in societies that have been shaped not just by what human beings need, though we fortunate ones get a fair amount of that. It has also been shaped by the selection for what serves power. And so we have societies for the last thousands of years that have been in many ways antagonistic to human nature. So whereas other creatures all have the right to live according to their own set of values, their own natural inclinations, because that is what has served survival, we are in this position where we have a set of demands placed on us, which is in some ways antagonistic to who and what we are. That kind of damage is part of what we're dealing with in patterns of brokenness. The other points I want to make have to do with the transmission of patterns and the working of forces. I've already alluded to that in a way by saying brokenness came in with the selection for power. The wounding has damaged us, so there's a transmission of brokenness, but there's also a transmission of wholeness. We create things like the United States Constitution. We create things like norms of behavior. We create things like traditions of loving parenthood that perpetuate wholeness. But there are other kinds of patterns that have been unleashed that I've alluded to. And these patterns are what we're having to contend with as a species, generation after generation, and now in America, even more intensely than we had before in this country. The problem is, are we going to be able to see our very complex situation clearly enough so that we understand what it is that we're up against and what it is that we have to do? I have been working for my whole life trying to put the pieces together. And I believe that the passionate intensity that we lack can be overcome in a variety of ways. But one way is we can think and understand ourselves out of this worldview on which the truth of our situation fails to register, and to connect more deeply with the moral and spiritual core from which passionate intensity can come. There are two kinds of passionate intensity. There's a passionate intensity you can get if I walk down here and I stomp on Amanda's foot. You will see passionate intensity. The passionate intensity of the wounded that comes from rage, that comes from fear, that can be enlisted by a force that appeals to the worst in people, can be enlisted to serve the cause of brokenness, which is what we see happening. But matching that passionate intensity doesn't mean having the same kind of passionate intensity. There's the passionate intensity of the wounded, and there's the passionate intensity of the lover. April, do you want to come up here? No. If we love our creation and our place in it in the way that all of our cultural traditions have pointed us to as the fulfillment of our humanity, whether it's Buddhism or Christianity or Rabbi Hillel standing on one foot, if we can get to that place, we have a different kind of passionate intensity. It does not deal in lies, it deals in the truth. It does not foster brokenness, it creates and protects wholeness. I know I've traveled a fair distance here, and this, I hope, is sort of I imagine it might be a little bit like drinking out of a fire hose. I just want to say that I offer myself, if there's interest enough, this really should be a series of talks, which I would be delighted to come and deliver on a Sunday basis or on a weeknight basis. I believe that not only our society, but our civilization is in need of an intellectual transformation that would also entail a moral and spiritual transformation. It has worked for me. My passionate intensity is more than my 67-year-old organism is comfortable with. And I believe that not overnight, I believe that this can be part of how we grow out of the civilization that we see around us into one which fulfills life's quest for wholeness by understanding the forces of brokenness and learning how to heal them. Thank you.